Hello, everybody. Welcome to Leading Through Uncertainty, Shift Happens. Really excited to be here with you today. I've spent the last couple of months doing a lot of conferences, so I haven't had a chance to do my original content here at the Thoughtexchange, and I'm really excited to bring you some new content today. So we're going to be talking about all the shifts that have been taking place, and I'm going to focus on the specific number and what they mean, how they got here, and of course, what do we need to do to make them stick. So the one I'm going to first touch on is certainty to uncertainty, which is probably one of my favorite ones because it's an interesting shift where I think a lot of people wish it went the other way around, that you're trying to get to certainty, but we're actually trying to get to uncertainty. I'm going to talk from company-centric to employee-centric, from equal to equitable, control to trust, and from experts to crowds. So when a little bit of history here, which is really interesting, is that shifts are always happening in the world. There's tons of shifts. We've had, 3 industrial revolutions before the one we're in right now. The first industrial revolution, which of course I'm sure we all don't remember, had to do with the steam engine, which of course allowed for factories and mass production. And anybody who's taken history in high school knows that there was a great emphasis on the change in the world that happened then. And then there was the mass production of steel, oil, the invention of the light bulb. Again, huge electricity in homes, that made a huge difference to us. And then, the advent of the internet actually started in the 60s, which a lot of people don't realize. And that was with those first personal computers and the home computers that came after that. But essentially, those were the big industrial revolutions. And most people consider that we're in a fourth industrial revolution right now. And the fourth industrial revolution is a little bit different from the other two because it's this idea that we're fusing things. So we're fusing the physical, the biological, the digital. Everything is fusing and it's moving faster. So really the time we're in is about those things, about fusing of things and moving fast. So what I'm going to be talking about today is really about the fusing of home and work and the speed of which that's happening right now. And just so you can think about how fast things have happened compared to the other revolutions, is that it took 75 years for 100 million people to get a telephone in their house. So that's a long time. It took 2 years for 100 million people to sign up for Instagram. And those of you can remember Pokemon Go, that's already a long time ago. It took a month to have 100 million people sign up for that. So the adoption of change is moving much faster and the acceptance of change. So what does that mean for what's going on in the work world right now? Well, certainty to uncertainty is a really interesting shift that I've seen. And what I'm talking about here is the idea of going from being sure about something to being unsure. So in fact, in learning, most people think that you go through time, you are uncertain, you don't know how to do something, and then you become certain. And when you become certain, it's when you can take all those shortcuts because you actually understand how things work. Well, what's interesting about people who are certain is that they're really, really frustrating. I don't know if you've ever met somebody who suffers from certainty. They're the kind of person that while you're talking, they're like, are you done? Are you done? Because I got something to say. It's like suffering from certainty means that you've essentially just closed your mind off to what's going on. So you're sitting, you're talking, you're looking around the world, and you're just sure you have all the answers. We call that closed and knowing. So, when you have a lot of certainty, you usually drop in emotional intelligence because you stop listening, you stop questioning, you lose all your humility. Well, I think we can say is what's happened in this last year is most of us, organizations and individuals who were certain about our business models and the way we work, actually started to move towards uncertainty, meaning that the rules changed and then everybody started to question what was going on. And what we found, and this surprised me, is initially we started to launch content, in March and April, and we thought, oh, everybody's gonna be too busy to attend virtual events or read our content. And it was the opposite. Everybody was reading everything they could, attending everything they could. Essentially, they had gone from closed and knowing to open and to learning and to having to be curious again. And even for me personally, I've been in HR for 25 years. I don't think I've ever consumed more content than I've consumed in 2020 in terms of conferences, readings, events, reading LinkedIn posts, because I'm suddenly curious again, the way I hadn't been curious before. It's as if I got to take a time travel machine back to the beginning of my career when I actually didn't know the answers. And it's amazing to not know the answers because then you actually tune into what everybody's saying and you stop having answers in your head while other people are talking and you're genuinely curious. Somebody who I really, really admire, Liz Wiseman, she has a book, Multipliers, and I saw one of her talks where she talked about, how tempting it is to be certain and to give your opinion all the time, and how that actually diminishes the collective intelligence around you. And one of her tricks was to give herself 4 poker chips. And the 4 poker chips were her 4 opinions she was allowed to give that day. And when she first did it, she was like, by 9:30 in the morning, I didn't have any more chips. Meaning that like it was just too easy to keep giving your ideas. But the point is that when you're doing that, you're not listening to other people's ideas. And so I thought this was an amazing idea, is to have a way to hear yourself and see if you're actually open to other people's ideas. Because this was the year of bankruptcies. It's like I had so many companies to choose from. It was actually sad. And you know, when you think about what was going on in these business models, likely they had a lot of certainty and they didn't lean into uncertainty early enough. Meaning, how can we do this? How can we reinvent ourselves? Because there comes a tipping point where it's too late to do that. So what I want to do with you know, the organizations we work with is really push into uncertainty, question, wonder, and open your mind to new ideas and ways of doing things. One of my favorite exchanges is one where we asked, what advice do you have for senior management that will help us, you know, endure the next 18 months? Now, this kind of stuff is the kind of thing you used to maybe ask before, but never listened to. You'd be like, hey, any advice for us? But it was like, no, we know what we're doing. What was amazing about doing these kind of exchanges, which we saw blowing up on our platform, is that organizations and senior teams are really sure they didn't know everything for the first time. And so when you run an exchange like this, what's great is you see things like challenge assumptions. We're not the same companies we were 6 months ago. I think everybody here feels that way. Make sure that we're listening to what people consider, you know, listen to subordinates, because at this point, they know what they need to do. And there's knowledge everywhere. Everybody's consuming all sorts of information and knowledge. And when they, you know, your staff and your teams tell you, you know, how to tweak your business, how to tweak your internal communication to give everybody what they need, you should be curious about that. And you should lean into uncertainty, because as one of the attendees of one of my previous webinars talked about the flattening of the curve is not just the flattening of the pandemic curve right now. The flattening of the knowledge curve is happening, where there's knowledge everywhere. And just because you've been in a role like I have for a long time doesn't mean I'm better able in terms of what I know now to deal with what's coming in the future than someone else on the team who is looking and reading and learning in different resources and has different experience that could help us for a future that was nothing like we had planned for. The next shift is from company-centric to employee-centric. Now, this again has been happening slowly. What happened over the last, you know, say 10, 12 months is that it's moving much faster. So I'm actually going to exit here, and I hope this works, so that we can do an activity together. So I'm going to use the chat. I know this is unusual, so I'm excited if you haven't done this before. I'll make sure you can see my screen. In the chat, I want you to think of when you're hiring somebody, when you're looking to hire someone in your team and you're looking for that ideal person, what is it that you want from that person? So if you can answer it in the chat, I have the chat open here. What do you want from somebody when you're hiring them? Think of the ideal person. What do you want from them? You want them to build relationships. What else? Do you want flexibility? New ideas? You want them to be loyal? You want them to be a critical thinker. If I'm not seeing yours, sorry, it's going fast. Be a leader, have passion. This is a great list, thank you. You want their undivided attention. And I'll grab one more. And you want them to have a growth mindset. Okay, I'm gonna just stop there. There's this amazing list. Okay, so I want you to think, if you found somebody and you were interviewing them and they were able to build relationships, they were flexible, they had amazing ideas, they were loyal, they were a critical thinker, they were a leader, they were passionate, they were willing to give you all their attention, leave it all on the dance floor, and they had a growth mindset, you'd probably be like, this person is pretty wicked, right? Well, I want you to do this next exercise with me right here. I want you to think of somebody that you work with, whom you are very close to, somebody you care about at work, somebody that you've probably nurtured or worked with, who's been your go-to person. I want you to think of them. You know, what do you want for them as a human being? Like, what do you want for them in their career and in their work? You can put that in the chat. That would help me. What do you want for them? Success and promotions. What else do you want for them? Compassion. You want them to evolve. You want them to belong. You want them to have recognition. What do we want? Fulfillment. Come on, I'm going to spell that right. If you want work-life balance, yeah, oops, got to put that there, almost there on my list. And let's try one more. And you want them to be respected, feel valued. Okay, I think I have a good list here. Okay, so we're going to have a little bit of fun here. You're going to watch me build this deck live with me. Okay, I'm going to paste that here, and we're going to go back. All right. So I want you to look at these two lists right now. Now, essentially, when we were a company-centric organization, we would try to look for this first list of people. We'd be like, this is the kind of person we need. And there was this assumption that this kind of person was a personality type, a certain sort of person who was built that way, and that under no matter what conditions of duress, they were going to show up like this. And in fact, if they didn't show up like this after you interviewed them, you'd be like, ooh, they interviewed well. I don't know, like, boy, that person really pulled the wool over our eyes. Because this assumption was that this person is supposed to deliver on this as a person, as part of their job description. What's interesting is when you look at this other list of what we want for people, if you think of this as inputs, like if somebody had success, promotions, they felt compassion, they were evolving, they felt belonging, recognition, fulfillment, work-life balance, respected, valued. If they felt they got that in their environment, they would then deliver on the first list. So this is the input and that's the output. Now, what's the key difference here when you're thinking about an employee-centric organization is employee-centric organization understands that this list here about the loyalty and the new ideas and thinking is actually something that just about everybody has the capacity to give in the right situation. So given the right situation or circumstance, I can give this. This is all within me to give, but I need to be in the right situation in order to have this come out of me. If I say, yeah, I have all of this in me, and then I get to a role that doesn't provide anything from this other list, well, then how am I going to be delivering on this list? It doesn't work that way. They're interconnected. So employee centricity is this idea that we create these environments, these amazing environments, and then people are able to show up as their best self. It's not that they didn't show up that way. It's that when we have environments that are the traditional environments, like we just reward the person who's the first one in and the last one out, no matter what it does to their work, their life, and to their health and to their well-being. Well, then this kind of person is going to burn out. They're not going to feel all those things from that first list and be able to maintain that level of performance. Another outdated thing when you're company centric is this idea of relocation. So people who live in a certain city are told, hey, if you want to be promoted and you want to grow into these leadership roles, you've got to relocate your whole family. Now, that maybe made sense back when people spent 25 years in an organization, but the average job is about 4 to 7 years and sometimes even less. So you're going to uproot that family, have a tremendous amount of stress in doing that for something that isn't your lifelong role, but actually is not necessary with remote work. So we have these outdated company-centric paradigms. And now we have coming in this new shift where people can work anywhere, they can work anytime. We can actually become far more company-centric, and it's easier, employee-centric. It's easier for us to deliver on that list now more than ever. And if we don't, we're actually going to miss out on talent. Another thing we're seeing with employee centricity is the idea that people's well-being, as we merge home and work into one space, then now, your organization becomes an integral part of making sure that you're okay all the time. Before it was this idea of like, hey, I leave personal stuff at home and I'm at work, Well, in fact, work and personal has fused right now. So things like, caregiving, mental health, these are all things that organizations are talking about, which before nobody did. When I think back to my initial job search, when I had my 3 children, they were young, I was doing everything I could in interviews to never mention that I had children, never have any pictures in my office or anything, because the concern is that I would be judged as somebody who is not as fit for promotion as someone else. Whereas right now, people's kids are running around, everybody's aware of family, and we're seeing into people's homes. One of the things that came up for us at Thoughtexchange was that we needed to support caregivers and mental health for everybody in the organization through COVID. And so we created this proposal, and this is what we're just launching right now. And here's the exchange. We basically said, here's what we're willing to do for caregiver and mental wellness support. And I can tell you, several years ago, not that long ago, you would never discuss mental health at work. In fact, if you talked about having a stressful situation or a concern about your own mental health or that of your family, you were concerned that you would not be seen as somebody who could go forward in this in your career. Whereas now we're talking about mental health all the time. And so we did this proposal to support people within their mental health because we understand the merge between home and work right now. And so here's some of the comments we've had, which is amazing because we're just launching this. But the idea here, if you look at the bottom one, it says, this will help alleviate the stress that moms and parents have been under. So the idea of discussing stress, discussing parenting at work, that's expected now in the new employee-centric world. And I'm just so excited about that shift because we see this shift now, the fusion of technology and life all together in work. And so, you might laugh whether it becomes like a funny Zoom dinner you're going to do or a Zoom sing-along, whatever you're doing right now to connect with your people, to see them in their full selves and to honor that from that other list. That's what employee-centric organizations are doing. Another big shift we've seen in language these days is from equal to equitable. And this one was, a more recent shift, since the murder of George Floyd, the discussion about systemic racism and what equality is has come to the forefront. And many of us were not really prepared for this because we were not experts in that. And so we're all learning this together. I love this quote here: to have a truly equal environment, you first must create an equitable environment, meaning that this assumption that everybody has the same advantages and starts from the same place, and that assumption that's benefited so many of us for most of our lives is actually being dismantled. So when you think of like the old idea of like, hey, as long as everything's equal or fair, I used to love that word. Fair is this idea that you're on the schoolyard and you're breaking a piece of gum in half and you're measuring it to make sure everybody has the same thing. But that's really outdated. So when we stop, the idea of equality was, you see comments like this: I don't care who you are, this is a meritocracy. We're judged based on results. This idea that there was some sort of neutral, objective way that everybody was judged. Hey, let's focus on diversity as long as they're qualified. These statements that really talked about people not understanding exactly what's going on in the world. We need to be consistent, or it's a slippery slope. If we do that for this person, we're going to have to do it for everybody. These are so outdated. And this comes from this sort of belief that, is of course not accurate, that there is equal footing. And what's so interesting when people say, hey, the person has to be qualified in order to be hired, there's so much data that shows that homogenous teams are not as effective as diverse teams. So therefore being diverse should make you more qualified, but we're not looking at things the way that we used to. When we used to look at the world, we tried to pretend this is what it looked like. It's easy to talk about equality if this is what your team looks like. I mean, if this is what your workforce looks like, may the best zebra win. Doesn't matter, but in fact, this is not what the world looks like. For many people, equity is the issue because people are not getting the same chances and advantages. And those who are talking about everything being equal versus equitable are those who have benefited from an inequality for a great number of years. This picture has become very famous. You can see it everywhere right now. And this is a great quote as well. I'll give you a moment to read it. So this idea that, we're going to get to equity if we're willing to give people what they need versus deciding that everybody should get the same things. It's recognized that some people are starting with a deficit and others an advantage. And if equality is what we're talking about, we have to build it by making sure everybody has the same chances and available options. So the idea of just trying to create a diverse workforce, but doing nothing to help diverse and different people from different backgrounds and experiences, if they can't get to interact and collaborate and meet people, then what's their chance of success? If you toss somebody into an org chart like this, which is what most org charts look like, it's really hard to learn how to navigate this kind of org chart. There's a reason for that, because most people who have worked in a world like I have for 25 years, I understand how to live in this world. But if I'm bringing in somebody from a different background, I'm going to need to offer some additional help. I call it a political guide, which is really saying, how do you navigate and be successful in this organization? If you're going to be disruptive with new ideas and new thinking, but you don't know who to talk to, how to do it, the culture of which the established workforce is in, how successful are you going to be at being a change agent? So you have to talk about connectors and influencers and how the behavior expectations are, so that people who come in who want to change, want to bring ideas, have a chance of being successful. We also decided to discuss systemic racism at work, which is something, again, that we would not have talked about any more than we would have touched on mental health. And so this is an exchange we ran, which we're asking, internally, what can we do to, to really talk about anti-racism efforts and Black Lives Matter? And here are some of the top thoughts that were really interesting, which is inequality is real. We have to look at privilege and favoritism, and we have to work on ourselves, and that we have to walk the talk for our own organization. And so we were thinking, how do we bring in this talent? Because I think what many of our organizations realized, many of our clients as well, is that we don't have an internal expertise. I've been in the field of D&I for about 4 years, and I am not an expert in this area. So when we started to think about bringing in the expertise, I said, imagine that you're the head of D&I and you're trying to solve a problem that we spent generations pretending doesn't exist. It's hard enough to fix an established problem when you come in from the outside. Imagine trying to talk about things that we are not comfortable talking about. So the answer for us is that we put the problem in the title. We actually have just in the last month hired 2 amazing experts. So we hired this wonderful woman, Karen Craggs-Milne, as our head of anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and Dr. Dennis Carpenter, who's our director of K-12 in terms of anti-racism and equity. So we're bringing in experts who've done this work, who understand this work, to help us, push forward in our journey towards equity, because this is something new. And if we want to shift from equal to equitable, we're going to need help. Now, control to trust. Trust is not a new, a new word in the corporate world. There's been trust training going on for probably a decade now, but trust has really shifted to a whole new level. So when we think about trust, you have to think that trust is not old. As we move people into this remote world, as so many workers were allowed to go home, work at home, it was really like, how can we make trust a business imperative and let go of our old paradigms around controlling people? So if anybody knows anything about self-determination theory, the idea is that, for people to have an optimal sense of motivation, they have to have a sense of autonomy, which means that they have freedom, they have to feel like they're competent in what they're doing, and they have to feel connected, related to people. So those are sort of the recipe, the trifecta for motivation. But if you had to pick one, because if you have to prioritize, you would actually pick autonomy. So more than feeling connected and loved and more than being competent, freedom is what people crave in order to have a motivation to do something. When in fact, so many of us spend time trying to control or monitor other people. And in fact, that's the worst thing you can do. So if you really want to unleash people in this new work paradigm, you have to trust that they can be autonomous and make decisions that likely they never were allowed to make before about how to use their time, when to do work, and what to prioritize. Why is it that we have such trouble with really letting go and believing other people will make good decisions and not take advantage of us? Well, there's been some work in what we call is the fundamental attribution error. You can Google this. It's an interesting piece here, which is the idea that, if something good happens to me, let's say I get a promotion. Well, I decide that I got promoted because I'm really skilled. I'm so bright. I work really hard. Like, I deserve that promotion. Like, I'm not going around saying I got lucky to anybody. I'm like, wow, about time, right? Promotions are all about me. Now, let's say I miss a bunch of deliverables. I don't get things done. Well, it's not because of anything except that I'm totally overloaded. I might have a personal crisis at home. Basically, there's external circumstances that are making my behavior not ideal right now. It's obviously not about me. On the flip side, what the fundamental attribution error says is that if somebody else gets promoted, I'm like, oh, look who's the buddies of the CEO. I guess you knew the right people, right place, right time. So I assume your success is due to some kind of circumstance that gave you a leg up over me. And if you're not delivering or showing up or getting things done, it's because you're lazy and you're taking advantage of the system and you basically just don't care. So most of us are wired this way, assuming that everything good that happens to us is because we're amazing and everything bad that happens is because of something external. And we see everybody else the opposite way. So we feel like, hey, when the cat's away, the mice will play, or if I give an inch, they'll take a mile. It's a really suspicious way of looking at people that in fact is not founded in any evidence whatsoever. What we found is when you give an inch, people will give you a mile. And we saw that with a lot of companies when they send people home to work. Instead of having people not work and take advantage like people assume would happen, what people started to do is work too much. And in fact, LinkedIn's blowing up with articles on how to get people to take breaks, how to get people to go outside. People are not shutting down. People are working on their vacation. So you give a ton of flexibility, and what do people do is they can't stop working. It's the complete opposite of what years and years of monitoring and control were about. So I know that Netflix, really shocked the market a few years back with their policy about unlimited vacation, because there was this idea, like, people can take whatever they want, well, then they'll always be off. Well, I can tell you that's actually not the case. Kronos also started with an unlimited vacation policy, and I love this quote from their CEO. A change like this requires a fundamental trust in the people who work for you. So you actually have to trust that the people who work for you are as good-hearted and committed as you are. And why shouldn't they be? Why is it that you're the one who cares the most and nobody else does? That's the attribution error. It's in fact not true. In our case, we have unlimited vacation at Thoughtexchange, and we also have a flex time that's much more flexible. And we're literally going to have to give a class, I'm doing this tomorrow, on what flex time is, because people are so concerned that flex time means that I have to balance every hour. If I start late, I have to end late. If I take a couple hours here, I have to make sure I give them back. And we're saying, no, this is about output. It's not about the input. We're not going to reward you because you're the first one in and the last one out and you never take any vacation. We're going to reward what you produce and what you do and what you contribute. And so what we're saying is that this is not what we do at Thoughtexchange. We are giving you real flexibility. We are trusting you, because in the end, when COVID started and everybody had to have their kids home and work in really strange times, what we asked our leaders is, how do you want to be remembered when we come out of this on the other side? How do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as the person who was really freaking out because you could hear people screaming all the time, or people had to book off a couple of hours to do online school with their kids? No, we want to be remembered as being trusting. We want to remember that we were flexible and adaptable as leaders, because really this is what's going to differentiate us in the future, is that we leaned really hard into this shift in trust. Coming to the end of mine, experts to crowds. Well, it's no surprise that experts have shifted to crowds. And why we talk about this is that experts have long held sort of this sort of Yoda-like wisdom, this idea that there's a couple of people in an organization who are smarter than everybody, they've been here longer and they know more. And so what ends up happening is the people who influence decisions of the room are usually the person with the highest title or the loudest voice, and even worse, the person who has a loud voice and a big title. Meaning that, when there's a question in an email thread or a meeting, the minute that person weighs in, everybody's like, well, to Dawn's point. So, there's this whole political bias thing that's going on inside these conversations. And what can happen is that if you're going to just one or two experts, you're probably not listening to everyone else. So what crowdsourcing is the idea that a diverse group of people actually makes better decisions than an expert. And this is a really humbling thing, especially for someone like me who's considered myself an expert for some number of years, is actually going to a crowd of people and asking a question that you think you know the answer to. And Gartner's had this finding, there's been a ton of studies on this as well, that a broader, more inclusive group have a higher likelihood of having a better business outcome. So, bringing a question to a large group of people who don't have your expertise, you'll actually get a better business outcome. So why do you want to crowdsource? Well, we already discussed it, that these scales of knowledge have shifted. Just because you've done this job for 20 years doesn't mean you understand what the next 20 years looks like any more than your very, very smart and well-read and educated workforce. There's expertise all over your organization. So the assumption that you are the expert is actually, kind of like the closed and certain person. Somebody who thinks they have all the answers are actually going to appear to be really out of touch with reality right now. And if you don't consult people when you're doing something, if you don't consult people on the things that are going to impact them, they're going to push back because they actually know a ton. And the assumption that you know more than them is really quite insulting. I actually crowdsourced for my onboarding. So when I started with Thoughtexchange last year in the spring, one of the things that I did is, of course, when you're being onboarded as an executive, you're meeting with all the senior leaders, and you typically would meet with the department heads and say, what are your ideas on what I should be doing? And you would kind of ignore that there's an entire population of people you're going to serve who should be equally as involved in your prioritization. So ran my new leader exchange, I asked the organization, what are things that are important for me to know as I set those objectives? Instead of me setting my first 30-day plan without any knowledge of what other people thought based on my past, the idea is that the windshield is a lot bigger than the rearview mirror. Look forward and say, what do you think I need to be doing? And I ended up getting some amazing input from the company about what I should be doing. I should be meeting people. I shouldn't keep my head in the clouds. I should understand that there's a lot of issues on the ground I need to face. Obviously thought exchanges, everything gets themed right away. So I'm here, I mean, my first week of work and I'm like, all right, here are all the issues that the organization are telling me are a priority, which are not exactly identical to what I'd heard in my initial interview with a very, very small group of people. And so by the end of my first week, I was able to share out the summary of all the input and feedback I had on the priorities that they saw for me as the chief of people and the actions that I was going to be taking. And so essentially crowdsource my onboarding, which I have to say is the most amazing experience because everybody has skin in the game and everybody wants you to succeed and they feel heard and you're actually being relevant as opposed to using old information. What I wanted to say as we're closing is that learning comes from everywhere. And even at Thought Exchange, where we run a lot of thought exchanges, we've never run more around learning than we had since the pandemic began. And so I just took a quick screenshot of all the exchanges I could find, and there's probably more, that had the word learning or new ideas in here from all these different leaders. And what you can see over here is that there's so many leaders asking questions about what can we learn? What are your ideas? What are you thinking? Because right now, the knowledge and information of your entire organization is what you're going to need to not end up on that slide I had of companies who aren't going to make it through. And I think there's something that we really understand here, which is if you're not harnessing the collective intelligence of a diverse workforce, if you're still sitting around a boardroom or a Zoom room or an email thread with a largely homogeneous, non-diverse team of people making decisions based on their past experience, good luck. The future is to harness the information and imaginations of everyone in your organization in order to solve problems and innovate for our future, or else, you know what, we're not going to make it. I want to close with talking about having your shift stick. So, change has this fun thing. It happens, there's this super big excitement. And then we have this way of sort of reverting back to our old ways of thinking. Anybody who's been on an exercise plan, a diet plan, will tell you that, over time, things start to slip and you start to go back to your old ways. While you can have an accidental shift, you have to be intentional about keeping it. So if any of these shifts are happening where you have your own list and you're really excited about them, you're going to have to find a way to cement them into your culture. And that's going to take some work. So even if they came upon you out of circumstance, what are you going to do to make them stick? I love this quote that I found, which is organizations should be using employee-centric insight to find their stories. I'm a storyteller, and to tell them in compelling and meaningful ways. And that's just as important as investing in technology. So if you're looking at your tech stack to make your changes stick, that's wonderful. You also have to look for what's being talked about in your culture as being what's making you successful now. And so we actually have a meeting. It's on the first Thursday of every month. And we call it Stories from Across the Company. And we literally invite the company to come and to share a story. So if you have a story, you put it in. We literally ask these questions. What are stories that you think we should all be hearing? And if your story rises to the top, we ask you to tell that story. So essentially, we're talking about what's new and exciting and changing in our world, and we're learning from each other through their stories. And so everybody rates the stories that they want to hear from others. And it's quite beautiful. You hear things that are what we want to do. If we want to build lifelong customers, I have a story I want to tell. And that cements that as something that we're actually shifting to intentionally. We talk about inclusive environments and collaboration. Well, if that's important that we've learned in these last few months, and most of us have learned a lot about collaboration, let's tell that story. And of course, a huge one for us is to bring people together in DE&I. And so if you're telling that story, you're cementing it as something important. If you're taking up company time to tell these stories, you're sending a strong message that this change is here to stay. So if your shift was accidental because of pandemics or other things in the universe that sent you to change, you have to make them intentional. So I would invite you to take an inventory with your leadership team of the shifts that have happened, like actually write down what have we gone from and to, and then add sustaining them and even improving upon them for your 2021 strategy. So with that being said, I've talked a lot. We're going to do a thought exchange. So a thought exchange, if you haven't done one before, is 3 steps. We're going to put a link right in the chat, and I'm about to pop a QR code up for you. We're going to ask you to share an idea, a thought based on the talk I'm giving today. And then after you shared a thought, you'll see the thoughts of others pop up and you just star them. 1 star if you're like, not really what I really care about, up to 5 stars if that's really something that resonates with you. And then you can scroll down to Discover to see how all the thoughts are doing. So I'm going to put this up here right now. And this is it. If you're using a QR code, you take your phone, you put it on camera, you don't take a picture, just put it on camera. It'll hug the code and you just press the pop-up and you can go into the exchange, or we've dropped the exchange here in the chat. So I'm going to just exit here and start the timer. And we will come right back. Just give me 1 second here. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. and get you into the exchange so we can have an inclusive conversation all together. So I invite everybody to come in. If you don't have a thought, you can just come and start starring the thoughts of others. So please just give you a few minutes to come and join the exchange, and then I'll answer questions and call out some amazing comments as well. So I'm just going to give you a few minutes. So hopefully everybody can come in. So I'm going to go and see what the thoughts are doing now. This is some great thoughts. I hope everybody comes into the exchange. About a minute and a half left. Now, just another minute. I'm going to leave it open, but another minute before we start our discussion. Almost there. All right. Love doing this. We have a lot of good thoughts coming in here. Tons of ratings. This is a great exchange. I'm leaving it open because I never want to silence a conversation. So first, this is a great example of being equitable. This is a big piece, is that everybody can share thought, and, even if you're feeling quiet, you can still be heard and see exactly how much alignment there is up there, but it's a ton. I definitely agree with this first thought. I see a shift towards more compassionate leadership style, definitely influenced by COVID and valued more. I think, the idea of people who really felt like, hey, I'm just not that kind of person. I remember I gave a course on trust a couple of years ago, probably maybe 8 years ago. And one of the factors in trust is having strong connections with people. And I remember there was a leader in the room who was like, I'm just not that kind of person. That's just not me. And it was like really interesting, because I said, oh, so even though there's all this evidence that having compassion and good communication with your team will increase their productivity, you're just going to sit this one out. because if there was like software you could use to increase everyday's productivity, you wouldn't sit that out. But if there's a whole way of leading that's actually more effective, we allow people to say, take a free pass on that. And I think that that's something that we really need to be working on, which is, what does compassionate leadership look like? What does the ability to ask an open-ended question like, how are you doing, or how are you handling this, and actually being present to hear the answer? This is no longer just the work-life coach who does that, but every leader is expected to be able to have those conversations. Up here now, it says, the question of trust really resonated with me in terms of our current shift. We need to grow culturally to adopt the trust needed for employee success. What I think is amazing about what happened is we just had a global study on what happens when you give autonomy and freedom and no oversight to people. And it looks like we passed. And, one of the quotes that I found really kind of interesting is Mark Zuckerberg saying, surprisingly, people were really productive from home. We're going to let people work anywhere. I used to think and fall into this idea that the idea that people couldn't be trusted really was from a different generation. And it surprised me that we even could have, leaders of tech companies being surprised that when people had freedom, they actually worked really hard. And that's the fundamental attribution error. It's this belief that we have to be suspicious of people and people trying to take advantage of us. And guess what? There is one person out of 100 who takes advantage of people. I got taken advantage of once by somebody who I gave a lot of flexibility to, but I wouldn't take away the flexibility of all the amazing people I've had work with me because I had one person who took advantage of me. That's like the idea of we have to, lead to the lowest common denominator. We should never be doing that. Yes, more flexibility allows people to feel in control. And I really think that the result of that flexibility that was that people doubled down on their commitment from it. And it was also interesting, a lot of industries in the financial services would say things when I would be working with them, like, we'd love to be flexible. We'd love people to work from home, but we can't because of security. And then bang, overnight they could. So what's so funny is that, problems that we couldn't, solve for 5 or 7 years about flex work and people working from home were solved in a few days. So evidently, when there's the right motivation, we can solve these problems. And then we end up having, article after article about people working too much. Excellent insight on equitable versus equal. Leveling the playing field. This is a really interesting one. I had a conversation with a colleague a few years ago that was really emotional for me. I live in Quebec. And if you're not aware of Quebec, we have the highest income tax in all of North America. And at the time, the person was asking me, why would you live there and pay so much income tax when you could have so much more? Have you ever calculated your take home if you live somewhere else? And I was like, well, yeah, we have really high income tax, but we have amazing services. And I talked about, subsidized daycare and, university only being $3,500 for everybody. And the person was like, why would you want to subsidize that? Like, you don't need that. And I was like, what's crazy is even though I give up a lot of my income to taxes, I still have enough. And all that money that I'm giving is giving other people the advantages that I had. Because the reason I got where I got is I actually had a lot of advantages before. And so I am now trying to help give those advantages to others. And it was a really difficult conversation because you have to actually accept that you didn't just deserve all of this and got it out of merit, but you got it because maybe you had advantages. And that makes a lot of people uncomfortable to address. And whenever I've talked to people and just called out the advantages that I do have to get me where I got, I feel like I'm being honest, and it actually feels great. So I think that this is something that we should make, we should get less uncomfortable talking about the fact that we had advantages and more focused on how to use those advantages to help other people versus pretending we didn't have them. I was just going to go look at our dashboard because there's a lot of cool stuff in here. Let's just see what we got here so I can make sure I'm getting everybody in here. I like looking at my word cloud. Control, that was a big one. Yeah, there's an interest. I don't know if anybody here in our chat can talk about things. Oh, I look over here. Control is such a strange thing. Control comes from fear. I used to not understand that. I thought people were controlling because, they, didn't trust me. But control comes from a fear of having your success be decided by someone else's behavior. So I have to control them. And, I think what we really want to do is help leaders feel more safe and secure so that they don't exhibit those kinds of controlling behaviors. But definitely I see that as well. I'm just going to go look at our bars to see if we have anything. Hmm. So shifts in organizations, what do we have here? Shifts are constant, adapting is the lift. Yeah, I think I saw another comment in here that I really loved about it feeling like it was circumstantial. So if that's your thought, I did see it come through that, the shifts feel circumstantial. How do you make them stick? I think that that's going to be my next focus for the work that I want to do is really what are the things that people can do to really help these things stick so we can become intentional leaders about it. Kind of like creating our head of anti-racism. It's almost like having the head of shifts that we need to stick with or paradigms we need to let go of. It's this idea of really understanding what it is that we left so that we don't go back there. Um, I see this happening again all the time. I feel like we see a promised land of what work could be, but then suddenly there's an imagined emergency that gives you a reason to bring everyone back. I think everybody remembers, I don't know, there was a lot of articles about Yahoo, like Yahoo's bringing everybody back. And I remember I had a leader I was working with at the time when I was trying to promote letting people work from home who was like, you see, it didn't work. And I was like, oh, okay. So for whatever reason, something happened at Yahoo that made them want to bring everybody back to work. I'm sure that was very successful. And now we're using that as the example of why nobody can work from home. It's the same idea of outdated things like dress codes. I saw that pop up into the exchange. There was a belief before that if you didn't wear fancy clothes, you weren't productive and you could only wear jeans on Fridays. Now, just think of how funny that is. The idea that if I'm wearing jeans, I'm not able to work. So as many of you must be right now, from the waist down, I'm wearing the softest pair of sweatpants you've ever seen. I'm apparently able to be productive wearing sweatpants. So I think it's just really funny that we think that there's this idea of a certain way work has to be done. And my concern is that there'll be one or two things that go wrong in an organization, and that will give people who are fearful of change and desiring the old ways sort of the ammunition to go backwards. So we really want to be intentional as leaders that you create enough momentum for that change that there's no possibility to go backwards anymore. And that's by calling it out and essentially operationalizing it into your mandate and into your strategy. Because if we don't seize hold of that, we're going to lose a lot of ground. Looking at some thoughts in it's hard to monitor the chat at the same time. We have a few more minutes here. I'm going to just go back to the thoughts to see if there's anything that has changed. We have compassion, leadership, flexibility, collaboration. Yes. Collaboration is something we really do need to use technology for because, old world collaboration, I don't know if everybody remembers this. It was either sticky notes that nobody ever looked at again after that day of muffins and fun. Collaboration could also be the same group of people in the same office because we never called anybody from outside. I've been remote for a lot of years and I would often be the voice on the triangle in the middle of the table. Remember those like voice things where you're like, and nobody can hear you and nobody cares and you don't exist. And what I find's happened right now is whether you're on Zoom or Teams or any of these systems, you go gallery style and everybody's on an equal playing field. Everybody can see each other, everybody can hear, everybody can speak. And it suddenly becomes, possible to have a voice when before there was probably, whether you invited to that meeting or whether you were only in person, there was more weight put to certain ideas versus others, versus not based on their merit, but based on external circumstances. And then the idea when we do thought exchanges is that I had a lot of challenges in my work and before, and even, up till I came to Thought Exchange, where I'd say, it'd be great if we involved so-and-so in these discussions. They would be like, either we don't have time or that person's calendar is slammed. So there was like this reason, like we can't collaborate with a lot of people because logistically it's too complicated. Whereas I would be like, well, I'll just run an exchange and I'll just send out a note. Does anybody have any thoughts or ideas on this? Boom, an hour later, I'd be like, all right, here are all the concerns. And so you have to make it easier to collaborate with people because collaboration is not something that we're really good at. We like to move fast and we like to move fast by everybody agreeing with us. So if you truly want to collaborate to get to the best idea, you're probably going to have to hack your traditional way you're doing it at work. I love the statement, the windshield's bigger than the rearview mirror. They always say that hindsight is 20/20. I love this forward thinking. I try to think of this all the time when people are like, let's do a big postmortem on everything that went wrong. And I'd be like, all right, let's talk about what we're going to do differently next time. Because if we're not talking about what's going on next time and how this learning applies to something we're doing now, it's really just a terrible use of time. And that's why people don't like doing them. They feel like they're being punished. To me, the school of life is just such a great instructor, and the best instructor is mistakes, but mistakes only are effective if you talk about how we're going to do something different next time. And so I do, often talk when somebody really wants to pick at something that happened in the past, is really like, I'm just going to do a quick look like that. I'm going to check my blind spot and then I'm going to move forward. I am not going to be looking in the past. I see people taking the opportunity to live out of the city and stay connected. I think it's important to be connected to the environment that enriches you. I completely agree. I actually live in Quebec, in Montreal, and our corporate, head office, for lack of a better term, we are remote, is in Rosslyn, British Columbia. So I'm actually 3 time zones away, and it's a small town. So it takes me, if I wanted to get there, 13 hours in terms of travel and driving. I bring that up because I don't go very often and I'm still the head of people. And I think that, we're living it here at Thoughtexchange. And I sometimes feel like I'm in this amazing science experiment where you really can live anywhere and you still have friendships and relationships and you still have all the same dynamics you have at any workplace. You don't have to be in the same room. Being more aware of coworkers' personal lives. Yeah. I don't know if anybody remembers this. I only have a couple more comments before I wrap up. Remember if your kid was talking, your dog was barking, you'd be like, shut up. Or if the doorbell rang, you'd be like, I hope nobody hears, because you're trying to pretend that life wasn't happening. It was like, we're going to all pretend that we have nothing going on. And then I was doing like one of my first virtual events, and somebody who was leading the events, kid was screaming and running up and down. And there was just this moment that it was actually like so fun. And then we started chatting about it. And it was kind of like the fourth wall was broken, that we all have lives that are happening at the same time. And now I feel like there is such a warmth to seeing people's, talking. We were having a really serious meeting and a colleague's mine, Kat, jumped on her light thing was swinging, and it was, everybody was screaming, the cat. And, I thought this is what makes work amazing. I'm so glad that we have broken that fourth wall. It never should have been there. I will do one more, and then I thought I'll give you a little bit of information before I let you go. It's time for a department to talk about what has shifted. We don't have enough open dialogue. Yeah, if you don't talk about it, it's going back. Just so you know, talk about it, talk about why it changed, what are the benefits, and what are you going to do to make sure you don't roll back? Because something strange happens. And I was talking about that, about the Yahoo situation. Something will happen in your organization that will give somebody the opening to roll back everything good that happened. Wow, you see why you have to go back to the way things were, why we all have to wear suits and, work here all the time and be the last one out of the garage. You can't let that happen. And so if you're really serious about this, I would say for your strategy for 2021, it's to recognize the shifts and what you're going to do to cement them in your culture going forward. And, yes, circumstances, whether it's Black Lives Matter and COVID, maybe got us to these discussions. It doesn't have to be what keeps us here. Be intentional to hold on to them. When we created those roles for anti-racism and equity within Thoughtexchange, it's because we don't want it to roll back. We don't want it to be a fad or flavor of the month. You have to do some really intentional work in your companies to tell yourselves, your employees, and the public that, this is true and you mean business and you're not going to change. So this was a wonderful talk. I'm so glad that you came today. I wanted to give you some information. I'm actually doing another one in 2 weeks. So I'm back trying to do a regular schedule, and I'll be back again in January. My next one is going to be the best of 2020, where I'm going to look at, the best questions that were asked in 2020 and sort of take you through, the iteration of all the things that we've gone through questions, because we're a question company. And so we have access to the thousands of questions that are being asked, and our use was up, 400 or 500% over this period. And so we have a ton of amazing questions. So I'm working with the team to cull down the best of 2020 to share with you. And that's going to be on, I'm just looking here, it's December 15th, I believe, at same time, 11 a.m., 2 p.m. So again, we're dropping the reg in the chat if you want to register or share that around. The other thing I wanted to let you know is that if you do want to, any more information from what's in the exchange or to know about Thoughtexchange, let us know. And finally, like I always say when I finish, connect with me on LinkedIn if you have not. I am the only Dessalen Wood on LinkedIn, so I would love to see you connect with me and share any comments. And just want to thank you for coming out today. I really enjoyed being able to share this content with you, and looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. So with that, I wish you all an amazing day. Thank you.